Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have my February wrap-up. I didn't actually believe that I would be recording a wrap-up this month because I didn't feel like I had read enough to warrant doing so. However, during the last week of February, I found myself overwhelmed by a want to read a certain type of fiction. I will talk about the 5 books that I can talk about today, but know that I did actually read 8 books this month, 3 of which were for the BookTube prize, and therefore will be getting discussed at a later date once the results of the first round have been announced. The first book that I finished in February was my own book, An Heir to Murder, and this is a cosy crime novel following the character of Alice Valentine. After the death of her auntie, she inherits the cottage in which she lives, and on the first day of moving there discovers that her next door neighbour has been murdered and ends up embroiled in the investigation alongside the victim's friend, Marmaduke Featherstone. There's an entire retrospective, so I will leave a link to that in the description if you want to go and hear more about how I came to write that book. Then I reread Spring by Alice Smith. Sarah over at Hardcover Hearts is hosting a read-along of the seasonal quartet. We've been reading a book from this series every month. I had absolutely no memory of what went on in here. As soon as I started reading, it all came back to me. So there's this character of Richard whose best friend Paddy has died, and he's feeling a bit withdrawn, a bit lost. It's as though he's lost the thing that keeps him grounded anyway. And he ends up travelling to basically the edge of the country. And then you have another concurrent story of Brit, who is an enforcement officer. And this book deals with discussions of borders and immigration in this country. It discusses life and art and the prolonging of life through media. It discusses resurrection almost with Spring and the way things are coming back to life during this season. How maybe our lives are prolonged throughout technology. I have really felt the benefits of this read along because I'm getting to see the thoughts of other people, and reading other people's thoughts and what they made of a book really helps to enhance the experience for myself and think, oh yeah, that's what that was getting at. Here we also got more connection to the other 2 books, Autumn and Winter. Reading it slowly is a completely different experience to how I've previously read these books, which was to just go straight through them without really thinking about what was happening, just being along for the ride without really taking much in. But being told to slow down and actually mull over what's being said has been quite fantastic, and I'm really grateful to Sarah for actually hosting this read along, and I'm looking forward to getting to summer this month because that's the only one I haven't previously read. Next I read The Girls of Slender Means by Muriel Spark. This was the first Muriel Spark I've ever read, and as soon as I finished it I wanted to go and buy her entire collection of works. I was astounded. I don't know why, but I'd got this idea in my head of the type of person that Muriel Spark was and the type of writer, and I was completely wrong. This story basically follows these women who are living in this boarding house in London. In the beginning, we have this mention of a gentleman who has died, and then we go back to the post-war period and discuss how the girls of Slender Means, the women who lived in this house, came to know him and the connections they had with him. This felt very much like one of those 1950s comedies of picking a setting, discussing various characters from that setting with an almost comedic climax that also happened to include tragedy. It was insightful of people of the time and opinions of the time, and it was exactly what I was looking for, because I think as we leave February and we enter into March, similar to this is exactly how I was last year. I've been doing a lot of thinking about who I am as a person whilst I've been left at home to my own devices, just stuck in my own head. And I recognise that last year I did the same thing of feeling particularly nostalgic in Spring. And I don't know why I ever feel nostalgic for the 1950s. I never lived through them. I wouldn't particularly like to live in the 40s and 50s knowing what the world was like and what it was coming out of. It felt so good to read a book quickly, to feel something for the characters, and I was quite annoyed because I was waiting for an electrician to come and fix our oven, and he arrived just as I was getting to the last 10 pages, and I just sat there and spent an hour or so reading this book. It was just a great way to spend the morning. I'm really thrilled to have finally discovered Muriel Sparks' prose, and if anyone has any recommendations as to where I should go next in reading Muriel Sparks, then I would welcome them. Next, I read Family and Friends by Anita Brookner. This one was actually inspired again by Sarah from Hardcover Hearts and Leo of A Little Book Life. They're going through the entirety of Anita Brookner's works sequentially. And when I first heard them talk about this book last year, I knew it was one of Anita Brookner's that I wanted to read because it does have this focus on family. I have since spoken to Sarah and discovered that actually this is strange for Anita Brookner to actually write about an ensemble cast, because she regularly just writes about one person, and that is where the phrase the Brookner woman comes from. Here we have Sofka. She is the matriarch of this German Jewish family living in London. She has something of an adoration for her eldest son and her youngest daughter, and the other daughter and son get somewhat maligned because they haven't become the people that she wanted them to become. Each chapter follows a different member of this family, and we don't follow them at one point in their life. We see them at various points in their life achieving things that their mother wanted them to achieve, but not perhaps necessarily achieving them how she wanted them to do so. It was great. It really was. I liked getting to read between the lines and do some work as a reader on this one. At the same time, we got Brookner's prose, which can sometimes feel a bit, not snarky, but maybe snide. It always has this sense of pathos about it, yet it also seems insightful. I think that Brookner really captured this family well. Coming from a rather large family myself, I'm always interested into how other people write families, and definitely I noticed some of the behaviours of this mother in other mothers from within my family and how they've treated their children. Again, we have an evocation of time. Brookner brings the family through the Second World War and discusses how it affects each of the different family members. This book is a rather short tome indeed, and should this book have been written today, I feel as though it would have been a lot larger and it would have gone into great depths. It would have filled every single nook and cranny to tell you everything about these characters, how they exist and how they coexist. Having the book be this size, it actually allows the reader more time to think, oh well, this is how this character came to be there. And also, it's a bit like a round robin. You know, at Christmas time when someone will send you the letter and tell you all the highlights from their year, this feels like various different highlights of this family, and you as the reader or that other family member having to piece everything back together. I was reminded a bit of The Eighth Life by Nino Harachvili simply by the fact that that book is about a family as well and they're living through the war. And whilst I never felt like that book was bloated and I absolutely adore it, I do rather appreciate the fact that this book is so slim and that we have to use our own knowledge of the context of the time and opinions of the time and how people behaved and what they were supposed to do with their lives. I'll figure out everything that Brookner is discussing in this novel. And then finally, I read The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which is the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy. I didn't really know what to expect going into this book, other than it had the narrative voice of you and that it was in the present tense. We have portions of the tale that are told in the third person, and we flit about this world exploring different areas and learning more about the politics and history. Whilst reading this book, I felt as though it was incredibly cinematic, and every time I have talked about this book, I have said about how I think it would translate well to screen. I think that N.K. Jemisin knows how to craft a tale so that it has all of those peaks and troughs that we're always looking for, but also it feels like you're being taken where you should be by a very skilled hand. There's a part of me that feels like it should be frustrated because of how formulaic the story is. In this case, I feel like it's very much that the formula has been utilised well. I'm actually able to visualise the scenes, and I did worry for the characters within this novel. Even though there are some very traumatic things that happen in this book, there was also something understated about it. There's a certain character when we are having the you narrative, and the way that's told, it feels held back. And then as we're going through the book and we're discovering more about this character, you begin to understand why it's being written with that tone. There is something of a time jump towards the end of this book. And at first I wondered about that. But then as things started to unravel and twists started to happen that had been hinted at before, so they never felt as though the reader was being cheated, that began to make sense. What we have here is a rather stupendous first book in a series, and I can understand the hype. I can understand why so many people have recommended this book throughout the years. I will say that there is definitely part of me that doesn't particularly understand where this story is going. I don't feel as though much really happened in this book other than we had characters on a journey and we were unravelling a person's life. All I can think is that this was a rather large introduction, that this is a prelude to the following books. And I don't have a problem with that. I should, but I think here it has been written so well, it captured my interest, and I was intrigued enough and care enough about the characters within here that I want to know what will happen and see how everything works out in the end. It lived up to the hype for me, and I can definitely see that this will be one that I go back to and read and reread. And them's the books. If you've read any of these books and would like to discuss them, then please feel free to do so in the comments. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.